And we have huge issues surrounding parking, surrounding safety, lighting, infrastructure, all of those that, while this is a linkage fee and not an impact fee, which impact fees would include all of those things, and I'm happy to expand it if that's what you think is better. But really, we have 4 stations being created, multiple housing projects being created, and I can't tell you if any one of us can assure you how people will get a job on those sites yet. And so for me, looking at this legislation, looking at it even at a larger scale for the state legislature, this feels like a reasonable solution that still actually just helps commit developers to showcase, here's my monetary commitment that we can work within. It isn't asking more or less of them. So I look forward to our continued conversations. I have additional questions on intros 810 and 844, but I will pause my time for now and pass it over to my colleagues. Council Member Salamanca is the only one signed up for questions, and then Councilmember Avilés. I was like Councilmember Salamanca first because Councilmember Avilés has
Thank
lots
you,
of questions.
Majority Leader Farías, and I'm here with my son Aiden. First, thank you for testifying. I just want to ask, maybe 1 or 2 questions regarding Hunts Point. So, we all know that EDC is the biggest landlord in the Hunts Point Peninsula. And the Hunts Point Forward Plan was actually created because of a coalition called the Longwood and Hunts Point Coalition. The Hunts Point and Longwood Coalition was created because of the amount of multi-agency projects that we have in the Hunts Point Peninsula. Whether it's the Department of Transportation mediating some land, the state with the the Bruckner Sheridan Expressway project, and other projects that EDC may actually be funding. And so the Hunts Point and Longwood Coalition was created because we felt that city agencies and state agencies were just not speaking to one another. And they were meeting for a few years, and then we realized that we needed the city's help, and we needed maybe an outside consultant to come and mold their vision and put it on paper. And the predecessor before this president, James Patchett, there was a $200,000 grant that was allocated to assist with this coalition. So it's my understanding that grant it's at its end, and there's an ask because the work continues there. Now Metro North is coming soon. The Sheridan Bruckner Expressway, it's still under construction, and there's still many projects in Hunts Point. Just wondering, does EDC plan on renewing that $200,000 grant to work with the coalition that actually was the brains behind the Hunts Point Forward Plan?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. Good to see you. So at this point, I can't answer specifically about that particular pot of funding, but we can certainly come back to you on that. But I do think you raise a very important point to the Majority Leader's earlier questions about how EDC really does try to come alongside communities in the development of not just our plans, but also like our project paths moving forward. Hunts Point Forward is a really important example of efforts developed in collaboration with community. And so we obviously want to continue that work, but let me come back to you specifically on the pot of funding.
All right. And then, I'm reading here in terms of, I really, if you can sign me on to these bills, I really enjoy, I think that they are common sense bills that we need. My concern with when the Hunts Point Forward Plan was announced, we were extremely happy with the announcement, and there was funding that was allocated. And there was $140 million that was allocated. $100 million went to the Hunts Point markets to help. They are trying to stack up the funding that they need so they can build a new facility. But there was another $40 million that was allocated. And the community was told that the community was going to decide how that funding was going to be distributed within city, within the needs of the community. Lo and behold, 2 months later, we find out that that $40 million has already been split up between the Department of Parks Department and the Department of Transportation. There was no real community input. Can you talk a little bit about that, or are you aware of that, of the way, or can you tell me who made the decision to allocate that $40 million without actual community input?
So unfortunately, I'm not prepared to talk about the specifics of that right now. But again, happy to follow up with you with the very specific details.
Yeah. All right. I look forward to your follow-ups. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Councilmember Salamanca. I'm happy to make sure we do a follow-up together to get through some of that, and happy to sign you on some bills because I'm glad you like them. A little nervous with the land use chair and looking at some of these things sometimes, but glad you like it. I'd now turn it over to Councilmember Avilés.
Thank you, Chair. Councilmember Salamanca, 40 million. 140, but 40 was for the community. That's a big number, they promised you. We got no such reflections of high numbers that way in our community, so we'll get into this now. But in terms of, I guess as it relates to Intro 860, while EDC may encourage private entities to hire through the city-run career centers such as Workforce One or the NYC Hire, or is it Hire NYC, I forget. Is this an enforceable mechanism at all, or is this just you should use it?
Hire NYC, thank you for your question. Hire NYC is a contractual obligation that individuals need to, at minimum, meet the reporting expectation. And then if it's found that they have not been successful in hiring based on the metrics and parameters that are outlined in their contract, EDC has the right to pursue litigated damages if they find that they haven't made a significant good faith effort.
And how are the metrics decided on those? Like, so for instance, a company is relocating into an EDC project. It's bringing employees. Is it asking for the company to meet a certain level of local hires, or what are the metrics generally that are being pursued?
So the Hire NYC contractual obligation kicks in if an individual is hiring for 10 or more jobs. I think through a series of, research efforts through our economic research team, they're able to use particular available public data and potential size of the project to estimate those particular job numbers.
So you do in fact validate what developers are saying?
Yes.
Okay. So I think you've answered some of my questions already in terms of the work that's being done through the rulemaking and your particular role, which we're very excited about. So in terms of what kind of guidelines does EDC follow when entering into community benefits agreements? Or does it just kind of accept the offer that the private entity offers?
I wouldn't say that there are formal guidelines to enter into a community benefit agreement. I will talk about the really intensive community engagement process. So we engage with council members, community boards, engaging directly with community individuals to hear their perspective on how they would like these CBAs to be developed. And then through a series of negotiation processes, finalize that community or the CBA.
Yeah, so I think what you describe is certainly the gold standard, but certainly not always the practice. And I represent a community that has not had that consistent kind of practice applied to projects. I guess I think it would behoove the EDC to make sure there is a consistent practice, not depending on leadership, but like an embedded policy of practice that any agreement that is made must include the community. Because Red Hook is a great example. We were not involved. The community was very surprised to know that its benefit actually went to Cobble Hill, not to Red Hook. So I guess somehow for EDC to codify that community means the actual community, not someone in the mayor's office deciding what they want to do and call it community. In terms as it relates to linkage fees, we understand obviously all these projects are different and they are coming from different administrations. Many we are inheriting, many we are engaged in creating. What we have seen, and part of the onus of this legislation, is that it's like live and die by the project, live and die by the moment, not centered around a set of principles and values, like how are we leaving our communities thereafter, or how is the actual surrounding community within the footprint of these projects truly going to be impacted and held over the long term when we're all gone doing our next jobs. And so what we've seen is that in some instances, I think I have here Hudson River Park Trust. My understanding is that Hudson River Park Trust receives 20% of a revenue share agreement with EDC. Now, this is probably a project by project situation because certainly I've never seen a revenue share agreement in District 38, although we have seen the prior council members set up funds in partnership with EDC when lease agreements needed to be signed. And so rather than the practice of just, I twist your arm because I need something, there should be a principle of engaging and investing truly in the community as a standard of practice. And I guess the last thing to say here is that, this notion that it would potentially harm, a linkage fee would harm a smaller developer, and we're going in that direction. A good number of these projects are not smaller developers. They're larger developers who should pay the fee for the privilege of making profit in our community, because that is what the projects will yield, is profit for them, and for the EDC for that matter. So as far as I'm concerned, it should be a matter of standard of practice that a clear investment be made whether it's a trust or what that mechanism looks like, but it is the bare minimum that should be done with every project that touches a community, especially if it is a community that needs some more investment and opportunity, which has been overlooked and negatively impacted by extractive kind of economic policy. So I'm going to get off of that because this is Majority Leader's hearing. But last question is, in terms of, I guess, enforcement commitments around CBAs, how does EDC envision how it would enforce CBAs, or how it currently enforces CBAs?
The enforcement of, meeting the agreement and the CBAs is currently under development. I think the most important thing is to just ensure that we have teams and project teams within EDC with the knowledge, as you mentioned, we're often inheriting situations as there's, changes in staff and just positions and roles. And so just creating those internal mechanisms to make sure that that type of information isn't lost is our first step. And then we're working with developing the right structure and actual formal processes to make sure that we are creating the proper systems to follow up and make sure that we're executing on our agreements.
I would just add on to that, council member, as one of the things that we would want to, talk about with you and the majority leader for both 860 and 861 is sort of a common understanding of the terminology that we're using, because obviously in some cases a community benefit agreement has a very different definition than others, right? And so like the example that you talked about with, say, a specific cruise ship that's docking at one of our cruise terminals that agrees to some type of community fund is very different than a points of agreement that's negotiated as part of a rezoning. That's very different than, all of these different elements. And I think one of the things that we have found, especially in the few years that Shahaila and I have been on the EDC team, is that given the variety and complexity of projects that we're talking about, obviously Councilmember Salamanca, like you, has a lot of EDC assets in his district, and our tenanting process is very different than the work that PJ's team does with real estate transactions, which is very different than when we're doing capital projects on behalf of parks and DOT, where we might not be able to, talk about a specific community benefit agreement with a public realm investment, but we are doing, workforce programming with Councilmember Nurse for capital work in that district. So I would just say, and one of the things as you keep in mind about our concern with Intro 164 in particular is the idea of cutting a very wide swath for a variety of complex projects. And as we think about 860 and 861, I think a lot of that negotiation will be like making sure we have a clarity on the definitions that we're using when we talk about impact and benefit.
Yeah, I obviously I couldn't agree with you more. We need clarity because I think the agency itself has been in community using interchangeable terms, and at the end of the day, what we see is extraction and no benefit we can hold. And that is outside of maybe one or two, we can see this one or two programs. We can't see the hires because we're never given numbers. We can't see capital investment from parks because there has been none. We cannot point to one project in Sunset Park or in Red Hook in the park with parks, with DOT, or anything of that matter. So we have a lot of work to do here to be clear with our residents and to show what the investments actually are. And I want to say that with the understanding that I know we are trying to repair some significant harm that has been done over a very long period of time with this community, and I know that's a slow process, and I want to acknowledge that there is movement. I mean, your position alone demonstrates that we are taking this bit more seriously. But the last thing I'll say is, you know, these reports that you brought, yes, they are online. They are relatively incomprehensible to access. Now, if a resident can't come and do a searchable, can search these documents, right? It's like the NYCHA problem. They put all the data on the world, but they're incomprehensible. Nobody can search them. So for that matter, they don't exist. So I think if EDC would really think about investing in a searchable database, right, with all these incredible you have the data. It's about making it accessible to communities, and even for us, it's going to take me. I got through volume 1, and I was exhausted. I'll get through the other volumes, but there's a better way to do this, and the organization should be striving to do that, because without it, it is not accessible. It doesn't exist. So thank you, Chair, for your gracious allowing me lots of time.
Councilmember, you always ride these hearings out with me, so you get to have some more time. Just quickly on intros A10 and A44, just a couple of questions just for clarity's sake. You've provided me a lot of information in your testimony. As it relates to intro number 844, does EDC believe that offering microgrants to specific qualifying businesses is feasible? And I know sometimes you folks end up being a fiscal conduit in ways for different providers, but do you folks see that as something that's feasible for the EDC?
So in this, I think we really would like to support and defer to NYCHA on the feasibility of doing this particular work. EDC is committed to entrepreneurship and development of local entrepreneurs, including NYCHA residents, but we just believe that this squarely sits in the purview of NYCHA.
Okay, and do you folks have any relationship or assistance for NYCHA's public housing development projects, their commercial areas? Do you work with any of them on that?
I'm afraid we don't
No?
interact with them.
Yeah, I would just add, Majority Leader, that for NYCHA development, whether it's, you know, I'm not even familiar with commercial that NYCHA has, but they're, you know, they have a real estate team, they have a development team, and so since EDC doesn't have any jurisdictional boundary over NYCHA property, that too would be squarely with them.
Okay, I'll reserve the rest of the questions for Councilmember Riley and I to discuss on the bills. I will say, while NYCHA does have all of those teams, we are also in a continuous mad dash effort to privatize NYCHA, and so, you know, there needs to be a general discussion around how does the city assist NYCHA without allowing the expansion of privatization. And so I know you folks are like, this is NYCHA's jurisdiction and their gig. They have proven at times to continue to operate at a deficit and are, you know, promoting the only way people get to fix their apartments is to sell their, like, you know, to privatize their apartments. And that's not necessarily where we want to put more funds into their hands, at least in my personal opinion. But I appreciate that. With no other questions, this panel is adjourned and you folks are good to go. Thank you so much for coming today. I will now move over to public comment period, and I'll open up the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed at the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, each member of the public will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topics, which again are introductions 164, 165, 810, and introductions 860 and 861, and resolution number 77. I'm going to call the, oh, and if you have written testimony or any additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Within 72 hours of this hearing, audio and visual recordings will not be accepted. I will now call the first panel up. That's Evelyn Ortiz, Larry Rothschild, Chris Lugero, and Gregory Morris. And because this is a female majority, Evelyn, you go first. Unless you guys have a plan, do you? Okay.
All right. Bueno, buenas tardes. Good afternoon. My name is Evelyn Ortiz, and I am the Co-Chief Executive Officer of Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow, a longstanding member of the New York City Employment Training Coalition. Thank you, Majority Leader Farías, and the members of the Council for the opportunity to speak to you today. So founded in 1983, OBT is dedicated to breaking the cycle of poverty and inequity through education, job training, and employment. Annually, OBT assists over 1,000 individuals, more than 90% of whom are people of color who are unemployed and underemployed and lack the basic numeracy and literacy skills needed to secure family-sustaining wages. We do appreciate the administration's efforts thus far to boost the economy post-pandemic, create jobs, and address inequitable practices. The appointment of Maria Torres Springer as the Deputy Mayor for Housing, Economic Development, and Workforce does mark a historic step towards systemic improvement. However, despite these advances, significant gaps remain that must be addressed as many of our communities continue to face substantial challenges. For instance, Brooklyn's overall unemployment rate stands at an 11.17% higher than the overall city unemployment rate. And in communities like Brownsville, these figures are even more alarming, with an unemployment rate as high as 28.8%. Furthermore, the Bureau of Labor Statistics forecasts an increased demand for highly educated workers by 2026. Many of our residents lack the essential skills needed for these advanced roles, limiting their ability to participate in and benefit from growing industries. And I just want to be clear, it takes OBT about 6 months to a year to train an individual in some of these advanced sectors. And if the person does not have English language literacy, it can take even more. It can take almost 2 years to have someone advance from a basic level to an intermediate level. So continuous, uninterrupted investments are necessary to address these challenges, and they're not enough on their own. Right, so overall, I think what's really clear, and based on what was shared today, is that there is a demand for these jobs within the community. There is a lack of understanding, based on what you were all sharing, around where these jobs are, like what types of jobs are available, not just for our higher skilled individuals, but those that are seeking to be upskilled. There is a need for funding, but a real need for real collaborative efforts on the ground, right? We need to understand the data, but we also need to be brought together. We're seeing that these efforts are happening across the state with like the micron investments, but there's so much more that we can do and we can leverage together as one system. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Larry Rothschild. I'm the Senior Managing
Just to make sure your microphone has to be on. This room is a little weird with it, but yeah, thank you.
I'm Larry Rothschild. I'm the Senior Managing Director of Workforce Development at St. Nick's Alliance. I'd like to thank everyone for your efforts. St. Nick's Alliance Workforce Development Center has been providing skills training and employment services for over 25 years. We serve 1,700 residents of North and Central Brooklyn every year. We are an active member of New York City Employment and Training Coalition. And we train in high demand sectors, including the green trades, healthcare, financial services, and and technology. We serve both adults and young adults, and we ensure that our participants have a lot of the skills they need to be successful: job readiness, digital literacy, transformational coaching, paid work experience, matching with industry mentors, post-placement job retention support, and alumni meetups. All of these services help them to be successful. We see both job seekers and employer partners as our customers, and we make sure that we're meeting the needs of employers. St. Nick's seeks funding to fully support the community demand for these sector-focused trainings. Additional funding would help. Funding does not always support the comprehensive services our participants need. For example, paid work experiences is not always provided, and it's a critical component. With additional funding, St. Nick's Alliance would run additional cohorts to better meet employer and participant demand and expand sector training for both adults and young adults. And also critical is longer funding cycles and elimination of funding gaps would allow us to maintain regular operations, meet demand, and maintain strong and experienced staff. For example, with our EPA funding, we've been able to run 3-year cycles without a gap since 2001. We currently train 650 annually. We run weekly info sessions, but our sector wait list and demand for trainings is growing. St. Nick's is a community-based organization, and our workforce development activities have stemmed from our work in the East Williamsburg industrial community, where we started with entry-level worker training for environmental remediation technician, truck drivers, bookkeepers, and office staff. We've expanded that effort, and now we partnered with Two Trees on the Domino Sugar Project redevelopment, where they've hired 150 people and work with us on all of our green trades. We've expanded this model for an employer-paid model. We're doing this on the Broadway Triangle redevelopment project with Mega. We're doing this on the Greenpoint Hospital redevelopment campus with Hudson.
You have to wrap.
Okay.
Okay.
And with Hudson and Greenpoint, Hudson and Broadway builders, and we've expanded that with employer partners in the community. Thank you.
There we go. Hi, okay. Okay. All right, we're good. Hi there, thanks so much for having me today. My name is Chris Lugero. I'm the Vice President of Communications here at the Doe Fund, and we are proud to be a resource and a partner in expanding economic opportunity to marginalized New Yorkers, 90% of whom are individuals of color, and all of whom are experiencing homelessness. We are so grateful for the support that we have received from the City Council to accomplish just that. Y'all may be familiar with some of our programming, Ready, Willing, and Able. It's connected nearly 14,000 people experiencing homelessness to employment and to housing. It provides transitional work experience, workforce development, and supportive services to help people stabilize and thrive. And actually next month, we're going to be beginning our first ever green jobs training track in HVAC repair. And you know, I think there's a recognition from everyone here that this push toward green jobs is providing a stronger pathway to living wage careers and high demand fields, right? Of course, we're also a proud member of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. It's the voice of more than 220 organizations that provide job training to more than 500,000 New Yorkers each year, and primarily in underserved communities. I'll let Greg speak more on that. But really to cut to the chase here, you know, Mayor Adams has set this goal in his State of the City a few months back for 5 million new jobs by 2025. The administration is going to rely on all of us members of NYC EDC to make that happen, and specifically on the organizations here, like the Doe Fund, to ensure that economic opportunity reaches those experiencing homelessness. And that's why we're all calling on the City Council to invest in equitable access to quality jobs for marginalized New Yorkers by increasing the funding for proven workforce development programs. I mean, at Ready, Willing, and Able, just participating in the program doubles the chance of getting employment. Graduates are earning 25% more than minimum wage and are half as likely to recidivate. I just want to share one quick story of somebody I spoke to, a graduate of the program, really quickly before I get booted here. I was talking a couple days ago with this individual named Gennaro Perez, and he came into our facility 10 months ago with nothing except for a commitment to change his life. Now, 10 months later, he's got his high school equivalency, he's got his American Welding Society certification, he was hired as a metal fabricator and a millwright, he became a member of the Sheet Metal Welders Union, Local 19, he's reunited with his children, and he is one of 100 people that will be celebrating at our graduation ceremony next month. And if anyone in this room doubts the importance and the efficacy of workforce development, of what we do, come to that ceremony. I'll give you the details, and you can talk to them face to face and see the impact of this work on human lives. Thank you for your time.
Majority Leader, thank you very much. Councilmember Avilés, thank you. There's been more conversation this week about workforce development for vulnerable communities than it has been in a long time, and that's a credit. That's a credit to you. I just want to start by saying, as representative of the New York City Employment Training Coalition, as CEO, as noted, 220 organizations all focused on workforce development. We see workforce development as a connection and as a linkage to economic development. That's the pathway to mobility, and that's the pathway to growth. It was important for us to come today, and there are others sitting who are in the next panel, who are here to talk about what they do, because what you've put forward in terms of these bills is allowing them to continue to execute on the priorities. And as much as our friends at EDC bring to the table significant resource and significant opportunity, and we'll talk the talk about workforce development, they are not the experts. These are the experts. These are the ones that are responsible for, in terms of being the skilled practitioners, being the advocates, ensuring that the local job seekers, regardless of their starting point, have access to opportunity. These are the truth tellers as well that will tell you whether or not we're actually seeing results. And as you have pointed out during this hearing, we're not seeing those results. We're certainly not seeing that accountability. I also just want to make one or two other notes in relation to EDC's commentary about cost. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars. We're talking about significant projects. The idea that we might then pause and say, but a consultant is too expensive to do a report is fascinating. That someone would actually hand you a giant impact report and say, all the answers are here, is absurd, and you called that out, and I appreciate that. I consider EDC to be a partner. I actually think ultimately we want some of the same things, but you have to make us accountable for, or you have to make it accountable for us to be able to do that work in true collaboration. People throw around the word partner a lot. People sign MOUs that talk about I'm your partner, I'm your partner, I'm your partner. Unless there's money on the table, unless there's power on the table, unless there's results on the table, there is no partnership. I appreciate every single bill you've introduced, the resolution that is critical and also calls into mind what we have to do in Albany to make some results happen. But this investment counts, and these are the truth tellers that'll tell you whether or not we're getting it done for you, your constituents in New York City. Once again, thank you.
I really appreciate each of you coming today and providing your testimony and the numbers and the stories that you are uplifting and elevating every single day and making realize, like, actually happening for people in our communities. I come from a place of working in government and then switching over and working at a labor nonprofit where I was actually the person that had to make these opportunities real for people or not. And so this topic today, this package today for this hearing, the bills that I've introduced are about re-envisioning our long-term planning and job training and development in our city. So I appreciate you folks coming. Just a couple of questions that I'm going to ask folks today. And I heard this somewhat. In your experience, what are the most significant gaps in terms of funding for job training and employment programs? And anyone can answer.
Supportive services, right? So when we think about the individuals that we're serving and what is happening right now when it comes to mental health, and how it's really impacting specifically our young adults that are out of school and out of work, and our adults as well who have been impacted by the system in some way or another. We need more funding to support supportive services, by providing those the case management support in addition to, like funding for food, for transportation. It's all lacking. And it is essential because there's only training funding, right, that's available. But how about the funding that is going to be needed in order to get the person through the door and retain them in the program and retain them while they're at the job as well?
I would also add to that the same supportive services, mental health, food insecurities, transportation are all critical. Most of our contracts don't provide for mental health services. We have to refer out, so that would be extremely helpful. And then also work experience, I think, should be something that every participant should be able to have access to.
I appreciate that. I know from one of my training pipelines was only 14 weeks, and by week 6 we were losing half of the class, because even with a Metro card and even with lunch and dinner covered, there were people that didn't have childcare or couldn't actually last without having an additional job. So having, some sort of allotment of funds to do the training. So I appreciate those responses. What has been the impact of major development projects in the communities you serve, both in terms of economic opportunities and community displacements or the lack thereof of investment?
I think for us, I mentioned that at St. Nick's Alliance we partner on some major construction projects and development communities, and it's been able to afford our participants to be able to stay in the communities that they come from. So that's been very successful. I mentioned the Chew Trees project, Broadway Triangle redevelopment, and the Greenpoint Hospital redevelopment. And some of these developer partners have also adapted to a pay-per-training model, so they're supporting us in ways that funding hasn't allowed. So I think that's critical to a local pipeline and career promotion in the sectors.
So we're along the waterfront in Sunset Park, and although we've been actively participating in many of the efforts that are happening, and there's a lot of announcements and a lot of movement that is going on, to date we haven't really seen the true benefit of some of these investments, and we know that a lot of them are still in development, right? So I think that at this very moment, what we're seeing is just a really great opportunity that we're gearing up for. And we're really excited about this opportunity and really trying to see how we can support both our adults and our young adults to prepare. But I think most of the jobs that we are looking to place our young adults in and our adults are outside of the local community. So that is something that we're particularly focused on as we continue these conversations, and really try to get a better understanding of when the jobs will become live, right? As we continue to train and empower people to gain access to these opportunities.
If I could just add, regardless of what project you pick, whether it's the Imagine project at Kingsbridge, or it is the North Shore of Staten Island, it's the Spark Kips Bay campus. Regardless of where you look at this particular moment, no matter what stage of the development there is, and actually you can work backwards to Hudson Yards if you want here, what you're not going to find is data that tells you where the local job seekers found employment opportunities. Mm-hmm. And while it is absolutely the case that this coalition, these organizations have sought to work in partnership with EDC, NYC Office of Talent and Workforce Development, SBS, and the cavalcade of organizations and entities that have an interest in what development looks like moving forward, the reality is we don't have a plan. There isn't a tent pole. There isn't a strategy. There's lots of folks with an interest. If SBS is in that pocket, it's thought of that SBS is the answer. SBS is not resourced by any stretch of the imagination to put people on long-term pathways to careers that they can live in New York City. In other pockets, it'll be CUNY. CUNY does fantastic work. They have had a very difficult time finding career pathways for CUNY grads because employers don't always look to CUNY grads for answers. And then there are providers like our coalition members, the Lower East Side Employment Network, for instance, which was in a pocket of the city on the Lower East Side that was able to demonstrate success, to be able to connect economic development, workforce development over the course of time, long enough now that that exists and it's in place, but they will tell you they had to rely on philanthropic funding to make that possible, not the commitment and connection of public dollars over the course of time. That's the kind of thing, that's the gap that exists. That's the kind of absence of accountability that exists. And to what you said earlier, that's the absence of investment that exists. And the true assets in this city, it's about the people.
Thank you. And I mean, I'd love to hear thoughts. It could be yes or no or expanded on the linkage fee, if it would be helpful, if providing job training and workforce development services, whether that's alleviating some of the costs that you have to offset for other items. I'd just love to hear thoughts on the linkage fees, if anyone has any.
Well, I can weigh in here and say this. As you heard from this group, workforce development happens within these shops. Each one will tell you that they are getting 80 cents on the dollar essentially from city gov if they're relying on those contracts, so they're already in a hole. I think they'll also tell you that philanthropy is a constant fight to be able to ensure the resources that they need. As was flagged during the course of this, supportive services are additional costs that are expensive. As was identified in the earlier conversation this week, the other hearing related to asylum seekers, New Yorkers, there are additional investments, significant investments that need to be made to build those on-ramps of opportunity over month after month after month. The value of a fee, the value of an actual commitment that's written and conceptualized as something you have to have in place, that's an accountability opportunity to make sure that building and developing results in actual employment opportunity. Employment opportunity only comes if the talent is ready. The talent's only ready if these guys are resourced to be able to execute on the training programs and opportunities. So I appreciate what you've put forward. One additional note, the city has relied on Hire NYC as a solution. It has not worked. I don't know anybody who would tell you that it has. I think people within the city secretly will tell you it hasn't worked. That's the pivot to the community hiring office, which is an interesting piece of this puzzle, which ultimately there needs to be some intersection in terms of accountability. But at the end of the day, if the wealth and resources aren't here, we're not going to see the outcomes. One final note, if you look at the dollars that have been directed to workforce development over the last 10 years, you will see increases. The problem is workforce development looks very different from the 16-year-old that reads at a third grade level for a first-time job to the second act job seeker who's thought their retirement was going to hold out and now it's not gonna, to the person who actually wants to be in the solar panel business in New York City and sees that as a pathway forward. That goes from $200 to 35 grand. Where is that money? How is it consistent? What does it mean? It takes more than what we have now to get that done.
Great. I really appreciate your responses. Councilmember, do you have any questions?
Yeah. And I guess first and foremost comment, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the work you're doing. And I 100% agree, you are the experts. And I think what we saw today and continue to see is definitely the gap, the gulf between the honest truth and the propaganda to make private entities a whole lot of profit, and sometimes making profit for our own city. And I guess, in terms of I was gonna ask you about New York Hire. I was also gonna ask whether I have witnessed city agencies, EDC, extract a whole lot of expertise from some of the entities on the dais and offer no exact contracts and no investment over the long term to be able, OBT should be seeing enormous amounts of investment to get ready for 4 years when SBMT is ready to transition into an actual staging center, yet there is unclear whether there are any direct investments there. So I guess I'm now moving over into comment land, but I guess I would like to know if you all receiving direct investments from some of these mysterious community benefits or funds or whatever they like to call them, which is why we need them to report and make consistent investments. So it's I guess a broad question. Are you seeing direct investments from EDC?
Sorry, I'm just gonna let the record reflect that there were nods of no.
A unanimous no for the record. Yeah, I guess I don't need to read any of this. We could just put it in the flame. Anyway, thank you so much for your work. We're going to continue to fight for full investment in in the work of workforce, which we know takes time, and we absolutely must invest in it. So I thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, folks. This panel is now dismissed. I'd like to call up the next panel, which I will just call 3 folks as a removal of chairs. Denia Tavares, Emerita Torres, and Antoinette Gregg. Sorry, I read that with a Bronx accent, everyone. You folks can begin when ready. Emerita, would you like to begin?
Is it on now? Perfect, okay. Hi, thank you, Majority Leader Farías. Thank you, Councilmember Avilés, and the entire council for inviting CSS. My name is Emerita Torres, and I'm the Vice President of Policy at the Community Service Society of New York. For decades, CSS has been working directly with NYCHA tenants to improve conditions, promote economic opportunities, and bolster resident democracy, in addition to the many other things that we do. Our Unheard Third survey found that 1 in 5 NYCHA residents are unemployed, with the highest unemployment rates among young men. So last fall, we co-hosted a workshop with Red Hook Initiative to uplift the resident perspective, which Councilmember Avilés actually attended, so thank you for that. 3 takeaways from the event. 71% supported making the Summer Youth Employment Program year-round and universal. Duplication of services and confusion about them was a large concern. Residents want a more centralized workforce development strategy, not a spattering of disconnected programs, which is why we support Intro 0860. However, the bill, we find, should clarify how the data will be integrated into the Mayor's Workforce Development Council. And finally, a key word here that we learned from residents was trauma. Residents stressed that jobs mean nothing without the censoring of mental and physical health. One resident said, employment is not the panacea for everything. Without support across all social determinants, you're on a hamster wheel. So alongside job training funding, which was emphasized in the previous panel, we recommend funding mobile health teams and trauma-informed approaches like Cure Violence in Chicago, the Trauma Response Team in Baltimore, and Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. Our written testimony outlines other recommendations, including reforming the current Section 3 federal program, which has failed NYCHA tenants. Intro 0165 could codify a Section 3-like program at the city level. However, we caution that not all projects are created equal with respect to margins and labor force opportunities, so we make specific recommendations to this bill in our written testimony. And finally, we are supportive of Intro 0810 and 0844 to promote entrepreneurship. We find that the number of self-employed NYCHA residents increased by 472% between 2012 and 2021, but that less than 1% of NYCHA residents own businesses, compared to 9.8% of the entire New York City population. And we think that these bills can create more NYCHA tenant entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Majority Leader Farías, Councilmember Avilés, and the members of the council for the opportunity to testify. I am Antoinette Gregg. I'm the Senior Director of Development for Perscolas. It is the oldest tech workforce organization founded and headquartered in the Bronx. In nearly 30 years, we have trained more than 25,000 alumni, and since 2009, Perscolas has trained more than 9,000 New Yorkers. We are poised this year to train 900 and next year 1,000. So we are expanding, and it's needed. Our mission is to advance economic equity by providing tuition-free tech training to individuals traditionally underrepresented in tech. On average, 9% of folks enrolled in our programs are BIPOC, 30% are women, 30% are from immigrant families, and this is in contrast to the sector where less than 20% of people of color and only about 5% are women. Since the pandemic, Perscolas has more than doubled the number of people enrolled in our programs. We've used a satellite model that allows us to work in partnership with CBOs to have classrooms in every single borough. We place our learners at 80% within 12 months of graduation, and they are in thriving wage positions in companies like Barclays, Morgan Stanley, Nagaro, and Tech Systems. In Q4 of last year, employers were looking to fill more than 32,000 tech positions in New York City alone, with a median salary of $128,000 annually. Of these jobs posted, 51% listed either no education requirement or a minimum of just high school diploma. Perscolas's population is this population. And so we have this huge task, along with my colleagues here, to upskill low-income folks, and this requires expanded and sustained investment. It is critical for the city to make investments in technical training and to also become a conduit to increase employer commitments from companies to hire for organizations like Perscolas, who have a proven track record of placing quality talent. So we commend this committee for the proposed legislative items and resolutions. And as a fundraiser and advocate for Perscolas, I implore the city to make technology as much as a priority as some of these traditional sectors of the city. Technology is burgeoning, it's ever-changing, it's pervading in every single sector, and it needs to be expanded. So funding for upskilling and training in tech skills is critical for New York City. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Okay, great. Good afternoon. So thank you to the City Council Economic Development Chair Farías and the Committee on Economic Development for their work to strengthen the linkages between economic and workforce development. My name is Denia Tavares, and I'm the Senior Manager of Culinary Talent at Hot Bread Kitchen, an organization that uses food industry as a catalyst for economic mobility. Thank you to the City Council for your ongoing support for our work, our members, and our initiatives. We are also a proud member of the New York City Economic and Training Coalition, and here today in support of increased funding for our job training, education, and employment program. Over the last 16 years, Hot Bread Kitchen has supported a community of over 1,700 women. Many of them are immigrants, people of color, and assisting them in launching culinary careers. We've also worked with employers, over 180 employers throughout the city, particularly in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. And, I'm sharing that information, and I would also like to add a little quick story regarding one of our members. So Ophelia immigrated from Mexico with her 2 children, and like 70% of the individuals that go through our program, she was unemployed. She worked through our culinary training in 2023. She launched her kitchen fundamentals and professional skills and learned to work alongside others. After graduating, my team provided her with direct job placement assistance, and she was connected with one of our employer partners, Farm to People. Today, Ophelia is thriving. She's working as a prep cook. She's able to provide for her family, and we hear great feedback from our employer partner, Farm to People, as well. This story illustrates the success of Hot Bread Kitchen's work as the nonprofit arm of the food industry, supporting job seekers, food employers, and the economy. These employers across the industry include corporate dining, bakeries, cafes, and restaurants. And also, I'm very proud to share that once our member is placed, they are more likely to stay at the job, and we proudly speak about 70% retention at 1 year of employment. On behalf of Hot Bread Kitchen, I respectfully urge the committee to pass this resolution. Thank you for your attention to this important issue.
Thank you all so much for coming to testify today. I'm very familiar with Hot Bread Kitchen and Perscolas' work, obviously, and CSS's work. Thank you to Team CSS for such an in-depth testimony. I will likely follow up with questions. There are a lot of recommendations there. Councilmember Avilés, do you have any questions? Okay, thank you so much. This panel is now dismissed. I'll now call our last 2 in-person panelists, and we have 1 person on Zoom. Ibrahim Xavier Johnson and Sharon Brown. can come to the office. Ibrahim, you can begin.
Yes, I can go? Yes, my name is Ibrahim Xavier Johnson. I live in Harlem. I have a construction background. I was in the Army Corps of Engineers. I did construction projects in Nicaragua, Alabama, and Louisiana. I also work for DDC, New York City Department of Design and Construction. I am aware of community impact. Every construction project impacts the community differently. I applaud you. I support this legislation that you're introducing. You're putting the community first. That stack of paper that you have right there, it's about empowering the community boards. I had a recent negative experience with MTA trying to propose a project. They offended us at the community board. And I thought about that when I came to this hearing, that the community boards need more input. Your legislation does that. I heard from the administration, they're talking about all this bureaucracy stuff, but the bottom line is that you are empowering the people. That's what we elect officials for. And I just want to remind you that we elected Yusuf Salam because of that reason. And in Harlem, I elect officials and I unelect officials. So as long as they empower us, as long as they make it rain, especially with construction projects are cash cows, and we should get paid from that. We should be hired, we should get the jobs. Your legislation does that. You're trying to empower us, and I'm very happy to be here in the City Council and glad to know that we have other City Council members with your vision. And I'm very happy that you're doing that, and please keep up the good work. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and I'll let Councilmember Salam know he must sign on to these bills.
Absolutely, he must.
I appreciate that. Sharon? Please turn on your microphone.
Before I start, I just want to say, release the hostages, let Yahweh's people go, defend Israel, try to do something
I will
about
remind
this.
you that topic, you have to be on topic at this hearing.
I am.
Okay, great. So please begin your on-topic testimony.
I couldn't help it. So this is economic opportunities, right?
Yes.
There should be funding for people to get houses and businesses. We shouldn't only be limiting them to getting apartments. The your own houses and businesses initiative. We're talking about small businesses, but there should also be some kind of initiative for people who want to become a major corporation. Maybe if some of these small businesses can get into some kind of program, or they make a program where they can become a major corporation. Like, say, if you have Kinko's get with Apple and a whole bunch of companies get together, and all the things they do, they come together and become one big company. The small businesses, not everyone, but some of them might want to become a major corporation that does a variety of things. And there should be economic opportunities for people who want to become a major corporation, not just small businesses. So houses, businesses, and major corporations as well.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. We will now turn over to our virtual testimony on Zoom, and I'd like to call on Alex Malesio. You can unmute yourself.
You may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Farías and members of the Committee on Economic Development. My name is Alex Malesio, and I'm here today on behalf of Urban Upbound, aka East River Development Alliance, Inc., to express support for intros 165, 110, and 844. Urban Upbound is dedicated to breaking cycles of poverty in New York City's public housing and lower income communities. Two programs that are central to accomplishing our mission are workforce development and entrepreneurship support, and Urban Upbound believes that the aforementioned bills would have a positive impact on this body of work. Regarding Intro 165, the creation of a workforce development fund supported by developer-paid linkage fees is an opportunity to fill two gaps that, due to limited financial resources, commonly exist in workforce development programs across the city. These are skill-specific trainings and stipend programs. For instance, Urban Upbound provided over 200 clients with OSHA 30 and/or site safety training certificates last fiscal year. We've witnessed the demand for these classes firsthand, and with additional funding, we can more than double the number of clients who enroll in our free classes. Additionally, some of Urban Upbound's most successful programs that provide free skill-specific trainings have traditionally been paired with stipends for participants. Such programs, which typically can take days, if not weeks, or potentially months to complete, and thus are often difficult to attend for New Yorkers who are trapped in cycles of poverty. Therefore, Urban Upbound recommends that the study proposed by Intro 165 explore the impact of specifically funding stipends and skill-specific trainings. Entrepreneurs, particularly those who are NYCHA residents, face when starting or growing a small business: lack of access to capital and operating space. Urban Upbound support works diligently to connect the entrepreneurs we support to accessible capital and operating space. But there's
Good, you can finish.
you can finish. But there is simply not enough available to meet the needs of lower income entrepreneurs, especially those who lack English proficiency or who are young adults. Urban Upbound fully supports all three of these bills and is happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for your testimony. You did go in and out for a second while giving testimony, so I would recommend that you submit your testimony for the written record. If you can make sure you email it to testimony@council.nyc.gov, just so we have it in completion. And I don't have any questions, but thank you folks for testifying today. The panel is now dismissed. Seeing no one else online or in the public to testify, this committee hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you so much. Have a good one. Happy Father's Day.